Could it be? With me, you're me, Louie T. Welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive limited series, The Reign of Terror, as we document and go on this very excruciating but necessary journey through the 23-year reign of terror of former Washington football team commanders and Redskins owner Daniel Snyder. So, we're in year two, the year 2000. And year one was actually an unexpected and pleasant surprise. Washington wins 10 games. They win the NFC East, host a playoff game, win, get to the divisional round, come within 1 point of beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and advancing to the NFC Championship game for the first time since 1991. So expectations, as you would expect, coming off of a successful season, were relatively high. And I need you to put on your thinking cap as to what it would be like if you didn't experience this. Think about what it would feel like coming off. And just if you're a fan of this team, think about what it felt like going into 2016 or 2013. 2013 was a little marred because Robert Griffin III was coming off of a major knee injury. Really didn't know what to expect with him. But the 2016 season, you were excited. You know, you were coming off of a really good season. Easily could have beaten the Packers in the wild card weekend. And the expectation was, hey, a couple of pieces here, a couple of pieces there. And we could be right back in the playoffs and maybe even make it further. That's kind of where we were, but it was a little bit more advanced because we were so dominant on offense. The defense wasn't terrible. It could use some help, and Daniel Snyder went out and got us help. So this was the first year that Daniel Snyder really started to put his imprint on the organization. And at the time, and you have to keep in mind of where we were, at the time in 2000, Daniel Snyder was viewed as this young, rambunctious, energetic, hometown fan that, ended up buying his favorite team, and he was willing to do whatever it took to win, including spending copious amounts of money. There was no expense that was too great to help his childhood team hoist the Lombardi. And so we didn't know that Daniel Snyder was going to be this toxic entity that was going to sink this franchise to new lows and depths that we couldn't even imagine. We were excited. And again, coming off of 99, all we felt like we needed to do was tinker with a few things here and a few things there. You had 3 first-round draft picks, courtesy of the New Orleans Saints, and then you had a couple of your own. We packaged up 2 of those first-rounders and ended up trading up to number 3. We had the number 2 overall pick because of the Saints and them trading away their first-rounder from the year before. And so we drafted LeVar Arrington 2nd overall. We drafted Chris Samuels, number 3 overall. And those guys turned out to be studs for us. That piggybacks off of Champ Bailey being a massive success last year as a first-round pick. And they went out and this was the thing, and you're infamous when your season can be described in 3 words. It's rare that a season can be placed in a box so nice and neat. All you have to say when you're talking about 2000 with the Washington Redskins franchise is the 2000 Redskins. The 2000 Redskins. And everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. It's like the dream team in Philadelphia. Every Eagles fan knows what you're referring to, what season you're talking about when you say the dream team, right? You've got to be infamous to get a nickname for your season. And ours was so simple. It's the 2000 Redskins. Yikes. Well, this season started off very ominously because the first thing that should have been done was Brad Johnson should have been extended. He wasn't because Daniel Snyder didn't want Brad Johnson in the first place. He tried to veto the trade that got us Brad Johnson when he got here in 1999. And 99 wouldn't have happened if Dan Snyder would have had his way. But because he got here too late and couldn't do anything about it, Brad Johnson goes on to have a Pro Bowl season. throws for over 4,000 yards, leads us to the playoffs, 10-6 record, yada, yada, yada. And so Snyder still wasn't happy. They didn't get anything done with Brad Johnson. And instead of re-upping with Johnson, giving him the confidence of, you're our guy, this is where we want you to be, they go out and get Jeff George, or not they. Daniel Snyder goes out and gets Jeff George to compete with Brad Johnson, despite him that doesn't even sound like something you would do at a quarterback position. It's to bring in a guy, a high-level quarterback at that, a guy that had just come off of a season in which he, had a resurgence for his career. I think he led the Vikings to a 10 or 11 win season the year before. He had won, I think, 8 of his 10 starts, and it rejuvenated his career. And so Snyder brings him in, right? And it wasn't for dumb money. It was for, hey, we want you to be our starting quarterback type money. So how does that make Brad Johnson feel, who wants the deal to stay in Washington? So right then and there, you already kind of offset the balance of the roster in not doing what you should have done with the most important position. But then he goes out and he spends all of this bread. He goes and brings in Bruce Smith, signs him to a big contract. Goes out and gets Deion Sanders, who was just released from the Dallas Cowboys roster, signs him to a big deal here in Washington, a 5-year deal. All right. Goes out, signs Mark Carrier, big-time free agent safety from the Detroit Lions, brings him here. Andre Reed, who is a future Hall of Famer off the scrap heap, he gets released by the Denver Broncos. We bring him in here. And so we got every name you can think of on the roster, right? And so it's just this big, grandiose deal that is being made about everything the Redskins have done this offseason. And you look at the odds makers, and we're the favorite. We're one of the favorites, rather, in the NFC to win the Super Bowl in 2000. That's the last time we've ever been that high in NFL circles in terms of the pantheon of teams in the league of where they thought we would finish. We haven't been a Super Bowl contender since 2000. That was the last time. And there was a lot of excitement if you can kind of put yourself in that frame of mind. Coming off of 99, adding all of those pieces, there was, adding Chris Samuels and adding LeVar Arrington, there was a buzz about the 2000 Redskins. Unfortunately, the season did not go the way that we had hoped. Now, it didn't start all that poorly. You win the first game of the season and you lose the next 2, right? And the one against Detroit was extremely disappointing because that game was there for the taking. We lose that game. I can't remember the score. It was a very low scoring game, like something like 15-13, 17-15, 19-17. It was a 2-point game. I do know that. Brad Johnson imploded in that game. He threw 4 interceptions. We had every opportunity to win that game, and we didn't. That was disappointing, but such is life. But after, losing 2 in a row, we lose to the Lions. I want to say it was Dallas after that we lost to. Then we run off like 3 or 4 games in a row. Let's see. We were 6-2 that year, so we ran off 5 in a row after the 1-2 start. And we're sitting there at 6-2, and you're feeling really good, but the noise outside the building was that this team doesn't look like they did last season on offense. And that was true. As a fan myself, I wasn't trying to hear any of the negativity. All of the things that the talking heads were saying on all the major networks, I didn't want to hear it because we were 6-2. We were winning ball games. It wasn't pretty. And in no victory other than the Jacksonville victory, which was week number 8, if I'm not mistaken, did we score more than 21 points, right? So all of these victories we were getting were low-scoring affairs. We were finding ways to win, which is all you have to do in the NFL is find a way to win. And we were doing that. So I didn't care, but I ignored a lot of the warning signs. They were there, right? You lose a Pro Bowl wide receiver from, or 1,000-yard receiver from the year before, in Michael Westbrook in week 2 against the Lions. Coincidentally enough, Brad Johnson had his worst game as a Washington Redskin in that particular game. And you lose him for the season, right? That's a 1,000-yard receiver from the year before. You lose a Pro Bowl guard from the year before in Trey Johnson in week 4 of the season. That doesn't help you, obviously. And then Brad Johnson, who was a Pro Bowler the year before, doesn't get the extension on the contract. You bring in a guy to compete with him. You pay him money. You don't pay Brad Johnson. His play is uneven. It was a mess, right? But despite all of that, you're 6-2, right? So I remember the next 2 out of 3 games were against the 2 teams that were in the Super Bowl the previous year. It was the Tennessee Titans and the Rams. The Titans were a Monday nighter, and I think the Rams were also a Monday night game, if I'm not mistaken, right? So you lose to the Titans. Brad Johnson gets injured in that game, okay? So he's out for at least the next 2, maybe 3 games. We have a bye week sandwiched in there, so you're hoping he could come back. And then in between those 2 Super Bowl teams from the year previous, and both of them were really good. The Titans were a juggernaut in those days. They were like the best team in the AFC, along with the Baltimore Ravens. Those 2 teams were really, really good. And then the Rams it was the greatest show on turf, right? They had won the Super Bowl the year before. They were continuing that in 2000. So you were looking at this daunting task ahead of you, but at least inside of those 2 games, sandwiched in between, was a date with the lowly Arizona Cardinals, who would finish the season like 4-12, 3-13. They were horrible. 2-14, something like that. They were garbage. So you're like, look, worst case scenario, we lose those 2 games. At least we beat Arizona, and we'll still be playing, solid, semi-solid football. That was the thought. So Johnson goes down against the Titans. We lose. Hard-fought game, but they just were better than us. And so you go to Arizona the next week, and Jeff George gets the start, and he's terrible. And we lose to the Cardinals. Another one of these low-scoring games. I can't remember the score, but it was like 15-14, 16-15, 17-16. It was a 1-point game, something like that. 1 or 2 points. The 17-15, 18-16, something garbage like that. Which is super disappointing because the Cardinals are, if not the worst team, one of the worst teams in football that year. So you're like, what the hell, man? What a disappointing loss. And then you go into your bye week sulking over that loss. 2 straight losses after starting 6-2. You're now 6-4, and you're staring the defending Super Bowl champions on a Monday night in the face coming off of your bye. And Johnson's not ready to come back yet from his injury, so Jeff George is going to have to play in this game. I'm counting that as another loss. You're probably 6-5. The Giants are playing good football. The Eagles are playing good football. Both of those teams are playing really well. Remember, that's the beginning of the McNabb and Andy Reid era in Philadelphia. So they were just revving that engine up. And so they were playing outstanding football. Kerry Collins, if you recall, was playing really good football for the Giants. As a matter of fact, they would make the Super Bowl that year in 2000, get their doors blown off by the Baltimore Ravens. So, again, the division is stacked right now with those 2 teams. So you got to play better football. We can't afford to be losing the games that we ultimately are losing right now. And so, and not to mention, after the Rams game, you've got 2 games inside the division, back to back, Philadelphia and then the Giants. Okay, so you desperately need to find a way to get this one against the Rams, give you a little bit of momentum going into a huge stretch of football games. Well, Jeff George plays the best game of the season of any of the quarterbacks for Washington. And Johnson did have a really good game against the Jacksonville Jaguars when we put up some big numbers there. But that was probably the most fun that we had in the 2000 season. And just to go back, another memorable game and now that I'm thinking about it, is the Buccaneers game. It was somewhere early in the season, maybe like week 3 or 4. Had to be 4 because we lost to Dallas, I think, in week 3. We lost to the Lions in week 2, and we beat Carolina in week 1. So it had to be week 4 or 5, somewhere in there. But everything freaky always happens when we play the Bucs. It's just I can't explain it. And I was still sulking from the year before when we lost to them in the playoffs, and some crazy stupid shit happened in that game as well. And so we're up against the Buccaneers 17-7. And we hit Sean King. He fumbles the football. He picks it up and finds an open receiver down the field. I don't remember who the receiver was, for a touchdown. And you're like, you got to be effing kidding me, right? So they kick the extra point. They get the football back. They kick the field goal to tie the game up, send it to overtime. I'm thinking we're going to lose now because we just blew a 10-point lead. And Deion Sanders, who, look, everybody likes to make a big stink about all of the acquisitions that were made. Bruce Smith, Deion Sanders, Mark Carrier, Jeff George, Andre Reed, all those guys that were brought in. And I totally understand why, some would be disappointed because we didn't get everything out of those guys that other teams had gotten out of them in previous stops. But you got to understand, those guys were past their prime. Those guys were old. Andre Reed, that Washington team was his last stop in the NFL. He was done. He had nothing left to give. Mark Carrier was probably the most disappointing of all of the guys that were signed. Mark Carrier was probably the most disappointing. Bruce Smith had 10 sacks in that first season. Deion Sanders had like 3 picks, and he had a huge punt return in that Tampa Bay game. So it's not like these guys didn't come over to Washington and have some semblance of success. They did some things. What was frustrating, especially with Deion, was that we didn't get a touchdown out of him. Everybody else got touchdowns out of Deion Sanders. We didn't get anything out of him. We got that 1 punt return. It was a big one. It set up the game-winning field goal, but we didn't get the pick 6 like everybody else got. We didn't get the punt return for a touchdown. He didn't score a single touchdown as a member of the Redskins. Everybody else seemed to have gotten that sort of success out of Deion Sanders, but that's nor here nor there. The bottom line is we beat the Rams. Like, it was exhilarating. I'm not going to lie to you. Jeff George starts that game, and I thought our defense really played well. We got after Kurt Warner, and the offense was clicking, and it was an all-around quality performance by a team that had underachieved to that point of the season. But you look up, and you're 7-4, and you're right in the midst of everything. If you find a way to beat the Eagles and the Giants, you're 9-4, and you're going to make the playoffs more likely than not, right? And so after that win, Washington goes to Philadelphia, and they promptly lose the football game. Now, Jeff George was awful again, just like he was. He wasn't awful. He wasn't good enough. He wasn't terrible. We could have won with that performance. He wasn't great. But field goal issues reared its ugly head. So Washington had some kicking issues in 2000. They go and sign Eddie Murray off the street. This guy had to be like 95 years old at the time. He was actually hosting a radio program, if I'm not mistaken. And so he comes off the street. He could barely kick the ball 40 yards, okay? I don't know why. Of all the guys they could have signed, I don't know why they decided to sign him. He could not kick the football the length that you need an NFL kicker to kick it at that point of his career. That said, they bring him in. He's kicking the football for us. The game against the Eagles, Norv Turner said that his distance, like the furthest he could kick the football, was anywhere from 44 to 45 yards. And that's stretching it, right? So they sent him out there to attempt a 44-yarder against the Eagles to tie the ball game up, and he leaves it short, and we lose 20-17 or 23-20, something to that effect. So whatever, Brad Johnson's now healthy enough to play. Norv Turner reinserts him into the lineup. I'm excited because I'm not a Jeff George fan, never have been, never will be. So Johnson had been so good for us the year before, and I wanted to see him kind of redeem himself. He did not have a good season, but I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they didn't give him the extension. They bring in another quarterback. They pay him money. They don't pay Brad Johnson. I think his frame of mind wasn't where it needed to be. And I think he was thinking about being somewhere else other than Washington. Like, they don't want me. Obviously, the owner doesn't want me. That was clear. Daniel Snyder made it abundantly clear. He didn't want you last year. He tried to veto the trade that brought you here. You have a Pro Bowl season. He doesn't want to pay you. And now he brings in Jeff George to replace you. So clearly, I'm not wanted here by the owner, the guy that matters the most. And I thought it affected his play. That said, they bring Johnson back in against the Giants. It's one of the worst games of the season in terms of offensive, statistical offensive numbers. And even with that said, we got a chance to win the game, man. It's 9-0, right? Johnson is just playing horrible, and they bench him. They bring in Jeff George. He takes us on this long drive. We score a touchdown. It's 9-7. We get the ball back. We got a chance. He takes us down the field. We think we got a completion to James Thrash. They overturn it, call it incomplete. So now Norv Turner has a decision to make. The ball is at the 30-yard line. You can bring in your place kicker, Eddie Murray, who is 97 years old and who could barely kick the ball more than 40 yards, in for a 49-yard field goal. Or you can go for 4th and 5 and try to convert, keep the game alive, get a little bit closer so that if you do have to kick a field goal, you can and maybe win the game 10-9. Well, Norv Turner looks at Eddie Murray, and they had a specialist on the team, a kickoff specialist. Back in those days, you would actually have a guy on the roster who can kick the ball off for you and kick it a little bit further than your normal kicker. Now, he's not necessarily the best place kicker, but at least he's got the leg. They had a guy and they told him, be ready from 47 or 48. Be ready to kick the ball. Well, this is from 49, game on the line. Norv Turner turns to Eddie Murray and he says, hey, get out there. And Eddie Murray's like, I can't kick it that far. And Norv Turner says, go kick the ball. He does. It's short. We lose the game 9-7. Norv Turner gets fired. Thereafter, Brad Johnson gets benched. Terry Robisky's your interim head coach. Of course, Daniel Snyder tells him immediately, you benched Brad Johnson, you insert Jeff George, because had George played, and he played well at the end of that Giants game, and had he played sooner, maybe we win that game. I don't know. But George comes in. He doesn't play well to finish up the season. We missed the playoffs. And, that team was just disjointed. If we're keeping it a buck with one another, that team really from the jump was never a team. You bring in all of these guys from the outside. You have some injuries to some key players, Michael Westbrook, Trey Johnson. Albert Connell was cutting up on the sidelines. He had gotten into it with Terry Robisky, who was the wide receivers coach at the time before being promoted to interim head coach. He gets into it in a game in Philadelphia early in the season that we won. It was a mess. It was a mess of a season. And you could tell, man, that this wasn't a team. We weren't a team. The year before, we felt like a team. Snyder came in, made all these changes, disrupted the rhythm and flow of the team, and he thought he could just throw a bunch of money at a championship. And that was the first time that I actually learned that in football, in other sports, maybe you can do this. Maybe you can chase a chip in the NBA by throwing a bunch of money and getting all the best players. Maybe you can do that in baseball, but you cannot, I repeat, not do that in football. You have to have a team. There has to be cohesion. There has to be a glue there. There has to be substance. And if you don't trust the guy next to you, if the guy next to you has an ulterior motive, like Bruce Smith only came to Washington for two things, money and to get the all-time sack record. He didn't really give a damn if we won or not. If we won a Super Bowl, that'd be great. because he hadn't won one in Buffalo. But really, Bruce could give two shits about winning. He wanted the money, and we paid him well, all right? And he wanted the sack record, and he stayed around just long enough to collect that, and he got the hell out of Dodge. All right, Deion Sanders signed this massive 5-year deal, played 1 year and retired, okay? He didn't want to be here, right? It was a mess, right? And so 2000 was, it should have been a red flag for all of us. We should have all pulled out the challenge flag and thrown it at Daniel Snyder then. But we still were kind of blinded like, yeah, all right, it didn't work. He tried, he swung for the fences, and he struck out. That's the way we chalked it up in 2000. But 2001 was a little bit different, and that's when you started to see people realizing, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? What is this guy really all about? And that's where we leave off on this reign of terror, okay? So you finish up the 2000 season in disappointing fashion. You start off 6-2. You don't make the playoffs, and you end up 8-8 in a season that had so much promise. And so you're thinking to yourself, all right, need a new head coach. You know, Norv is finally gone, which probably was 2 or 3 years overdue, but 99 gave you restored hope that maybe Norv had figured it out. But Daniel Snyder, again, anything that Norv may have figured out, Daniel Snyder came in and undermined it immediately. So it was tough sledding, but you had hope. They bring Marty in, and that's where we're going to leave off, heading into year 3 of the reign of terror of Daniel Snyder, and 2001. And could hope be restored in the nation's capital? Stay tuned to find out. But that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on the reign of terror, Daniel Snyder's journey for Washington fans through hell. But we look like we're going to be back on the other side. Feels good, feels good. In any event, I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.